I made this poll. Did you or do you have a dad or granddad who physically helped build Canada? Logging camp, mining, railroad, helped construct a building. And it looks like helped construct a building got the most with 37%. Anyway, the results I received were so beautiful and so touching and so, edifying that I just had to make it into a video with all the replies. So here goes. Rod Weinmeier said, homesteaded, cleared the land, broke it, plowed it, planted it, harvested it. And Farmer Jer said, don't forget, they were allowed to defend it too back then. Oliver Closehoff said, all of the above. Bertel at the wharf said, yes, several generations actually, from the basic birth of the country and both world wars to feeding the communities via veg, cattle, or fish. Many folks have a long tied history to this once glorious country. And Lorna Richardson said, too bad some leaders don't appreciate the services of our veterans, farmers, truckers, etc. Canada was once the most respected country to call home until the WEF and losers think they can take over. Bring common sense back ASAP. Bertel said, Lorna, I couldn't have said it better myself. Farmer Jer said, farmers built this country, not politicians. Bertel at the wharf retorted, yes, as a fisher I'd say fish and farm fed this once glorious and self-sufficient country. And Bertel added, but like manufacturing, it too is being taken away from us by our European allies since the 60s, the 1460s. If you want to go back far enough, but at this point, those are barely marginal details. The 1960s is when the government gave up on homebrew food and products, and it's just coming to a head now, 60-odd years later. T-Boy's Toys says, my granddads and my dad and a couple of brothers were coal miners here in Cape Breton when steel and coal were king, and everybody ate well, and we were warm and looked after, and I had 15 brothers and sisters. My mom was a homemaker, or a superwoman, and we never missed a meal, and Dad raised us all on a miner's wages. All the families back then were huge. A family next door had 11 kids. 3 doors up there were 21 kids. Another family close by had about 20 kids, and no one was out robbing their neighbors or hating on each other. We all got along for the most part. Neighborhood quarrels which were over an hour later. LOL, oh the memories. Donald A. says, I worked in a potash mine 47 years. One of the 99 says, yep, but it's not on your list. My dad was a lineman who helped bring power to our counties. He just passed away at the ripe old age of 99. Rest in peace, Dad. Deplorable says, worked in the BC bush for 4 years and have been involved in countless high-rise buildings in Toronto. Roofer's Nail Hardest says, my grandpa worked for McDonnell Douglas and built bombers during the war and the Avro Arrow in the 50s and 60s. Chris says, does Juno Beach count? And Fred Fostick replies, it should. Much respect to your dad, granddad. My dad was one of the first peacekeepers when he served during the Suez Crisis. I followed suit and served in Somalia and Bosnia. Thomas Howlis says, both worked on the Burlington Skyway, older and new bridges. Both worked at Nanticoke refineries. My grandfather went on to become a building inspector for the government. My dad had his 35-year union pin, UBCJA, before he passed. My other grandfather was a pilot instructor in World War II. He then went on to become a lawyer and judge in BC. Tony Bongo says, my dad opened up the oil and gas industry in northeast British Columbia. His dad was a coal miner, dug the shaft for the mine at Evansburg, Alberta, also served in World War I at Ypres and seriously wounded on the Somme. Naked says, yes, most of the area around Jasper, Alberta and Camrose, Alberta are accessible because of my grandpa. The Cleanest says, yes to all of them. Crazy in the Kootenay says, broke sod in South Saskatchewan with 2 Clydesdale horse. Talenthon says, might not sound as grandiose as some, but my grandfather started a butcher shop about a year after immigrating from Holland. chose Canada because, contrary to U.S. history, it was Canada that liberated the Netherlands. He was also an initial organizer for an event they called Friesen Day, a day for immigrants from Friesland, a province in the Netherlands, to gather and celebrate both their heritage and their new home. He was also very generous, helping those around him. Roderick Allen says, if you call Edmonton's high-level bridge a building. John Smith says, what about farms? My Opa built a succession of larger farms before, quote, retiring to oversee his son's divide, then multiply the assets. Brian Banman comments, my grandpa, my dad, all my dad's brothers, myself, are all truckers or mechanics, though I am finally getting out of this cursed industry. Trials Ryder writes, I heard we had a family member that was in the Pony Express, but never got his name. Ixter23 says, well, my grandfather served with the RCA in World War II, and he is descended from the original settlers in Ontario who fought for the British and then fled the USA. 1785. KWC remarks 3 out of 4. Canaduck says, should have put a no option. Brian Daraz writes, my grandparents came over here from the old country Europe. I'm not sure what year it was, but I do know their first home was a sod house built into a small hill just outside of Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. They farmed a quarter section. In the winter, my grandfather would walk the railway tracks up to Regina to work in a furniture assembly plant. It was the only way he could get there without getting lost, he told me. It took him 4 to 5 days, depending on weather. Then in early spring, walk back. James Fish says, both granddads died because of mining. One lung cancer, one crushed by rock burst. Theo G. Rahumi says, my father built tons of buildings, my grandfather built tons of buildings, and my other grandfather did some logging and worked for the railroad company and built and renovated houses on the side. Lynn Legault writes, road construction. Ken Mcrae says, my mom's dad was a coal miner and my dad's dad was a lumberjack and carpenter who built houses. My great-grandfather on my dad's side was also a carpenter who built houses. Ruth Elizabeth says, my dad, World War II, D-Day, Juno Beach. Sam Seed says, 3 out of 4 above. Jerry Harrison writes, you forgot the farmers. Farmer Jer, you missed the most important one. Farmer could do all 4 of those things, plus clear and plant 20 acres, all while fighting Indians and milking a cow. Sam the electrician writes, my granddad helped build the Welland Canal. Crimson Dragon says, my grandfather was in the Navy. Ominous 434 says, my grandfather immigrated from Italy and worked for the city of Montreal. He arrived there with 25 cents in his pocket and built his life here from scratch with my grandmother. Not necessarily building, but maintenance, if I remember correctly. The Imaginarium Network says, somewhat mining. Worked at Inco for, well, from his mid-20s till he retired. Justice Warrior says, yes, and farming. Many generations. The Hot Mess says, logging and mining. Rob Kapash says, take it all back. I pretend to understand comments. My parents immigrated from China nearly 40 years ago. My dad helped work on some of the parts that are up in the Canadarm. I consider myself Canadian first and Canada first, though completely understand and agree with those who say that national identity is more than just where one happens to be born. David Weston comments, my dad was in the Air Force. My grandpa helped build in Eastern Canada, was a carpenter. Elizabeth tells us, grandpa built and carved church pews. Dad worked in the North Vancouver shipyard during World War II. We came from Russia, Poland, Germany. Greg Cole says, all the above. Don M. Grandpa farmed through World War II. Some of his brothers fought. Mike Polowitz, SBR Full Audio. Alaska Highway through Alberta. Schwartz says, yes, in World War II. Old Stock White Canadian says, yes, since 1604, got here and started building ships. Last 4 generations were founders and metal workers. Smashy Smasherton, all of the above. He was an equipment operator for about 50 years. Tony Damiani says, my grandparents immigrated to Cobalt, Ontario during the silver rush in the early 1910s, then moved to Creighton Mines near Sudbury in the mid-1920s. Melva Baker tells us, broke farmland. Denis Tilcott, yes. Ken Lompart, My grandfather worked in the mines in Sudbury, Ontario for years when he came to Canada. My father, who is 88, was born there. Jim Miller. My dad did the blasting for the Trans-Canada through Northern Ontario. Crazy Carbo. Dad was a surveyor for water rights in the Navy, World War II. North Run Grader. All of the above and more. God bless them all. God bless Canada.